Anyway, we're talking this morning from John chapter 21, verses 1 through 14, in the series you've been going through in John. We want to talk about Jesus being our certainty. I mean, we know life isn't certain because if you walk into Best Buy and you buy a new headset, I'm on planes a lot, and the high-end headsets, if you walk in there, they're going to try to sell you a warranty because you cannot be certain that thing's going to last. I mean, that's just a demonstration of how uncertain life is. Whether you're young or old, life is uncertain. Our new lead pastor, 36 years old, his wife last year diagnosed with a pretty severe lung disease, and so getting treatments, and there are only 2,000 people in the whole country that have this disease. And this week, on top of all the strains from discovering that last fall and a collapsed lung and all that, they get a $5,200 medical bill. Just uncertainty what's coming in the mail. So I'll be 60 in September. I'm playing that card, right? I'm playing the old man card because I'm starting to get like cheap coffee at McDonald's. I mean, you might think it's cheap as far as value, but I like it. And suddenly they're offering to me for like the senior discount, which is weird. Anyway, we live in this really old house in the capital city, Concord, New Hampshire, the Shire. And last fall, I was moving our mini fridge from our screened-in porch down into our basement, and it's old granite steps, uneven. And my oldest son is there, and Stephen says, "Dad, can I help?" I said, "No." Second time, he says, "Dad, can I help?" I said, "No." I get to the last step, and he said, "Dad, can I help?" And I said this, "I am not 60 yet." And then I fall. And a gash opened my cheek, and I got blood running down my face, and I'm laying on the floor, and my wife runs over, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Jesus, just take me home." Like, life is uncertain. So now, even at, let's see, what did I say? Jay and Susan's house last night, when I'm walking up and down the stairs, I grab the rail now because I'm so uncertain of life. Well, whether you're 60 or 16, whether you're in college or you're older, we wrestle with this reality. Where is our certainty? This being Church Planting Sunday, by the way, every church that's ever existed was once planted. The first church I pastored was planted in 1823, and no, I was not the founding pastor. It was has had many pastors and pastoring at church for 10 years. The reality is that every community needs gospel presence. In New Hampshire alone, out of 230 towns, there are 60 towns in New Hampshire without an evangelical presence. And all we believe as Christians is we preach the gospel, we gather around Jesus, we raise up leaders, and we send people out on mission. And just basically repeat that. Preach the gospel, people come to Christ, we gather them around Jesus and disciple them, we raise up leaders, and then we send them out on mission. This is what the church is all about. And yet we ask ourselves, well, can we be certain that God can use us? Can God use church at Newtown Square to plant more churches? Well, I am certain of this. The future, as we look at it, whether you're aging or you're young and you're wondering, am I going to find a life partner? Am I going to get a career? Regardless, life in this world is uncertain, but Jesus is certain. And the text this morning drives this home. Our resurrected Jesus, which this text is coming right out of the resurrection. Chapter 20 is the resurrection. Chapter 21, our resurrected Jesus is our certainty in an uncertain world and with uncertain lives and with a mission that to us seems uncertain. And so let's take a look at this. Now, this text we're looking at, John chapter 21. I'm awake. John chapter 21 is coming right on the heels, as we've said, of the resurrection. And if you're new to Christianity or you sort of like, you're not certain of Christianity, listen, at the heart and center of our faith is that Jesus, the eternal Son of God, fully man, fully God, died to take the justice of our sins upon himself. We believe in justice. God believes in justice. God's a just God. God executed all the justice of his punishment that we deserve on his Son. His Son paid for that. So I am no longer guilty of my sins as I place my faith in him. And then he conquered the other enemy, which is death. And death still has a high success rate. In other words, none of us get out of here alive. And so Jesus, who we believe to be God's Son, has conquered our guilt and our great enemy, death. And now that Christ is raised, we can have certainty in what he is doing and who he is. And so our text leads us in that direction. That Christ in this cosmically changed body, not confined by doors or by tombs or by grave clothes, this Christ is at work in your life. He cares about you, and you can be certain of that. He wants you to be assured that he is at work in this uncertain world in your life, and that is your certainty. I heard this last week, it just stunned me. Like, you know, the story, the resurrection, the angels are sitting on the tombstone that had been rolled away. And I think it was Kathy Keller, Tim Keller, you might know the name. She said this, and it struck me like it's like, Jesus didn't need the stone rolled away to let him out. He could walk through doors. He could raise through grave cloths. The reason the stone was rolled away is so we could go in and see it's empty. And there's nothing limiting what Jesus is doing in our lives. What we need to do is keep focused on who he is. So we're going to look at this text. Jesus is now making his third appearance after the resurrection to his disciples. The first was on what we might call Easter night, Resurrection Sunday. That night, they had all huddled back in the little room they had rented, and they were huddled there. And in John chapter 20, Jesus shows up, and he tells them, listen, you guys, be at peace. Peace be to you, he says. He says, I'm going to be sending you out. There are 10 guys present. Judas was gone, probably dead by now. Thomas wasn't there. Thomas would say, they'd tell him, they'd say, we saw Jesus. He showed up. And he said, I don't believe you. Until I want proof. 8 days later, second appearance, John chapter 20. Thomas happens to be in the room. This will be the next, probably, Sunday night. Jesus shows up, and Thomas sees the resurrected Christ. Now we get to John chapter 21. Later, it says. And here's what we're looking at. We're looking at this idea that Jesus is our certainty, and our certainty while waiting. Let's read in John chapter 21, verses 1 through 3. After this, so this is Jesus revealed himself again, third time, to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. He revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, Zebedee's sons, and two others of his disciples were together. So if I do my math right, I think we're up to, 7 out of the 11 remaining disciples are gathered. Verse 3. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter says to them. We're coming with you, they told him. This is interesting. Jesus has now appeared in his resurrected, reconstructed, eternal body to them, and yet now they're still waiting. Okay, what do we do? 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 You know, waiting seems to be a theme of following Christ. Like, okay, Lord, like, what's next? I don't know if you feel like that. Young people like, okay, God, when am I going to meet my future partner? Can I pass this course? Will I get the career? You know, as you're older, will we have children? Won't we have children? As you get even older, like, will I succeed in this career? Or will I keep this job? Will I make enough to buy a house? And we just go through life with this sort of anxiety, like, the next thing. And then as you get older, like, will I have enough for retirement? And then when you're retired, you're kind of like, will I stay healthy? And then after the health starts to decline, is anybody going to be around to care for me? This theme of waiting on the Lord is a major theme of the Bible. And we are struck with this thought that while we wait, we can be certain that Jesus is up to something. There's not a lot to pull out of these first 3 verses. There's been some commentators that critique Peter for actually suggesting they go fishing. Now, if you know anything about the stories of the Bible. If you don't, Peter, one of the guys that Jesus calls into his inner circle to raise up as leaders, to go out and plant churches, preach the gospel, plant churches, raise up more leaders. And he was, by profession, his family were fishermen. And so he's been waiting for Jesus, right? Like Jesus appears after the resurrection, first night. 8 days later, he appears. Now they're back. They moved from Jerusalem, where they'd been, where Jesus was crucified. They're back to Capernaum, I think about 90 miles north. Back home, Peter's going like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? I'm going fishing. Everybody else says, oh, we're in. We're all going to go fishing. Yeah, they don't know what to do. I think, and commentators debate about, well, was he sinful? Was he like ignoring Jesus? Like, are you kidding? Like, it's actually good to be productive. And let me just say, when you're waiting for Jesus to come out, show you like next steps or like Mr. Right or Mrs. Right, when you're waiting, just be productive. That's not a bad thing. It's actually it's part of our global calling, is to contribute to the global community through our productivity and our ability to serve others. And whatever you're called to do, just do that with all your might. I mean, more than half of living is just being faithful at being productive in your role while you wait for God to give you the next instructions. By the way, there's a verse that says in James chapter 1, let endurance complete its work in you. So part of the waiting is just enduring. Enduring that, you're being, the Bible says you're being perfected. You're being, it's doing work in you that can only happen as you wait on the Lord. So what kind of certainty does Jesus give us? Well, he gives certainty to us while we're waiting. We're still waiting for him to come back. Like it would be nice if Jesus came back tonight. I'd be fine with that. It would be okay. Like, boom, everything's better. Like, that would be just swell. And if he shouldn't, what do we do? I think it's okay. Peter went fishing. Let God continue to work out what he's doing to you while you wait. Now, this leads us to a second thought. What kind of certainty does Jesus give? Certainty in our weakness. Now, this is interesting. Verses 3 through 5. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. When daybreak came, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not know who it was. They didn't know it was Jesus. Verse 5. Friends, Jesus called to them, you don't have any fish, do you? They kind of looked around their empty boat. No. I want to stop right here. Because who's in the boat? There are 7 guys in the boat. We know names of 3 of them. This gets pretty interesting. Peter. Peter is notoriously doing crazy stuff. Like, he sees Jesus at one point walking on the water. He says, Jesus, I'm going to come to you. And Jesus says, come on. So he gets out of the boat and he walks on the water and then he sinks. And what do we remember? Peter sinking. In fact, in this scene, he won't even try to walk on the water. He swims to shore. Like, we know Peter as the one who would deny Christ at his trial and betrayal. We know Peter as the one who, when Jesus said to the disciples, who do people say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says to Peter, you know what, Peter, yeah, upon that rock, upon the truth of what you just declared, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. In the very next verse, it says, Jesus began to tell his disciples he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things, and die, and be rose again. And then Peter rebukes Jesus, and Jesus turns to Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. So like the first one to profess Jesus as Christ, within like 7 minutes is being told, you're working for Satan, buddy. Like, this is Peter. This is Peter who, when Jesus is on the mountaintop and heaven breaks open and Elijah and Moses show up, Peter has this great idea. He says, let's build a building for each of them. Like that's really strategic. Like, Peter is all over the place. He's the perfect poster child for Christianity because he is like always coming up with like bad ideas or making bad choices or saying dumb stuff. I don't know if you relate to Peter. In fact, later on, Peter would actually get rebuked by Paul because Peter was given the vision that the gospel is to go to everybody, not just Jews. And so he had these crazy dreams of like grocery carts of unclean food because he was Jewish. He couldn't eat like good stuff like bacon. And he got a grocery cart from heaven, actually a sheet, but that doesn't sound so cool, of all this stuff, and God says, eat it. And he says, I can't eat it. And God says, I made what I call clean is clean, which was a message to Peter that the gospel is to go to all people, and that the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, no longer bears on the New Covenant people. And so Peter hears that, and then like a couple, it's probably like 18 months, 2 years later, Peter backs away from that, and he stopped eating meals with the Gentiles. Paul comes along, finds this out, and rebukes Peter. Like, this is Peter. He's a pretty weak character. Who else is named in this fishing story? Thomas the twin. We know him as Thomas the doubter. In the very last scene, not last scene, but Jesus appears when Thomas was there, because the first time he appears, on the night of the resurrection, he appears to 10 of them. Thomas isn't there, and Thomas says, I don't believe you guys. So Thomas is, even though he's a man who has incredible gifts and follows Jesus and is known to take the gospel to India, we're reminded that Thomas is weak in his sense of he has trust issues. You got Peter, who's all over the place. You got Thomas, who's a doubter, and then you got Nathaniel. Nathaniel, in John chapter 1, he's known as this. It says, Jesus decided to leave Galilee. He found Philip and told him, follow me. Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael, Nathanael, who's mentioned in our story today. Nathanael told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. And here's Nathanael's line, because it shows he doesn't like rural people. He doesn't like people from small town. He says, can any good thing come from that podunk place called Nazareth? Like he's really got social prejudices. This is Nathanael. Why we bring this up? Because they get named in this story. And they don't get named as heroes. They get named to remind us that God works with weak people like Peter, like Thomas, like Nathanael, and like you and me. Jesus doesn't have options. We are all weak. And this is our certainty, that God works through weak people. These are the apostles who are called the foundation of the church. Their teachings and their life and their model of ministry would become the foundation of why we're gathered here. And when you feel weak and you feel like, oh man, God can use Pastor Tom or some of the elders, some of the godly men and women in the church, but God can't use me, let me just remind you, if you're weak, you qualify. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. Write that down if you're taking notes. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. Look it up some point. It starts this way. Jesus said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. I love this story because the certainty of Jesus is that he works in our weakness. He works in our waiting while we're waiting for him to show up. He works in our weakness. And in that we can find, as Paul said in that 2 Corinthians passage, therefore you can take pleasure in your infirmities, reproaches, necessities, persecutions, distresses, all the things that make you weak. You can find confidence that Christ works through that. So we have certainty in Jesus in our waiting, in our weakness, and most importantly, and it's the rest of the text, that we can be certain because of Jesus' faithful care for you. Let's read verses 6 to the rest, 14. So, wait a minute, let me set you up here. Remember what's happened? They've gone out, they fished, we're waiting for Jesus. They go, okay, well, let's go fishing. They fish all night, nothing happens. Some guy calls from the shore, hey, you haven't caught anything yet, have you? Jesus didn't laugh. It's just like, that's what it sounds like. And they go, of course we didn't catch anything. Now we pick up the story. Cast the net on the right side of the boat, he told them, and you'll find some. So they did, and they were unable to haul it in because of the large number of fish. The disciple, the one that Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tied his outer clothes around him. I think he kind of balled it up and made it in a knot, for he'd taken it off, and plunged into the sea, since they were not far from land, about 100 yards away. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish. And when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire there, with fish lying on it and bread. "Bring some of the fish you've caught," Jesus told them. So Simon Peter climbed up and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. Even though there were so many, the net was not torn. "Come and have breakfast," Jesus told them. None of the disciples dared ask, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them. He did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Such a cool story. Now, there's all sorts of speculation like, what does it mean to cast your net on the other side? I think while it's fine to speculate, I just think this is just the deal. Like, Jesus is Lord of the Sea of Galilee, and like there's no symbolism here. It's just like they worked their tails off all night, did what they they were fishermen. This happens. Fishermen often have empty nets. And so Jesus just said, "Hey, I just want you to know, trust me, cast the net over there, see what happens." What's the secret number with 153? There's all sorts of speculation. Like, at that point in time, there was 153 known nations. Maybe there was a secret symbol here. No, I just think it was a big catch with big fish. I think overreading into this gets dangerous. I think, why didn't Peter say, "I'm going to walk on water to you"? I think just because the normal mode of mankind when it comes to water, and I got to get to there, from here to there, is not like I'm going to walk on this thing, is I'm going to swim. It's just like, I think he forgot the old story that happened 2 years ago, and he just jumped in because he wanted to get with Jesus. I don't think there's a lot of hidden mystery here. I think what we can be certain of is that Jesus actually cared for these guys because they had been working their tail all night, waiting for him to show up, and he knew that they were bone tired and they were hungry. And what does he do? He invites them to breakfast. Jesus likes food. The story of the kingdom begins in a garden and ends at a marriage party with all sorts of feasting. And in the middle, we remember the Lord's table. He takes a Passover meal, reconstitutes it, and says, "I want you to take this regular meal and remember something." And when Jesus cares, he cares in abundance. We can't see what Jesus is doing. We have no idea how he's using your life in the garage you work at, or in the school you go to, or in that wonderful family you're a part of. It might be wonderful, it might be dysfunctional, but like God is doing stuff we can't see. And sometimes he allows us to see it. Like, I think that's one thing that the cast the net on the other side says, like, Jesus is at work, and he's the king of the universe, and he controls the school of fish in a lake in Israel. Like, that's pretty detailed control. And he is using you in your common everyday life for purposes you cannot see. Do you know that if you go to your office and you work as if you have the character of Christ, and you're honest, and you're filled with integrity, and you work in a way, do you know that there's, just by that common work, there's an aroma of Christ that permeates that office, and nobody can stop that? Jesus is faithful in the abundance of how he works through us, and he gives us strength. Now, there is something unique about this, because this is the second time a story of catching fish has happened. Back in Luke chapter 5, similar scenario happens. And one of the big differences is that when they're hauling in Luke, they're hauling in the fish, it says the nets begin to rip. Here it says they got 153 big fish, and their nets were just fine. Why do you think that matters? Because I think in the disciples' head they're going like, oh, like God is controlling even the nets, so at this time they're not going to rip. Like God is in control of things. Jesus is Lord of all, including the fisherman's net. But this faithful care comes down to bread and fish. Now, if you don't know the Bible, a couple times Jesus has had, like, he's a really good teacher, all right? And so there are thousands of people listening to them. They've gone past lunch and dinner, and Jesus says to the disciples, hey, we got to feed this crowd. And none of them had any money left on their debit card, so he says, what do you have? And they collected some bread and some fish, and he prays, says, Father, thank you for this. He, through his miraculous power, being Lord of all, divvies up the fish and the bread to feed everyone. Now, what are we having for breakfast here? A common meal, fish and bread. Do you think there might be a trigger in a good way that the disciples going, he knows how to take care of us, even on a lousy morning where we caught no fish. He comes and fills our boat with fish, and he cooks us breakfast. We can be certain that Jesus faithfully cares for you. Never seen the righteous forsaken, nor their children begging bread. There's a heart for Jesus for you that you have to, by faith, believe. He doesn't just love us in a common way. He loves you in a specific way, with faithful care. It doesn't mean life won't go easy, or it doesn't mean life will always go easy. In fact, there'll be many times you wake up and going, there are no fish in the net. Not that you're a fisherman, but you know what I mean. You're kind of like, I'm waiting, Lord. He is faithful. He cares for you. And he promises to meet our daily needs. In fact, the outline for prayer, like the basic prayer, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. I think in this story, there's a reminder that Jesus will certainly care for you, even if it's just today saying, I'm with you at your meal. You've got enough food to eat. With that, you can be content. Why? Do not fear, little flock. It is my Father's intention to give you his kingdom. In Christ, you inherit everything that belongs to Jesus. Everything. The kingdom is yours. This is why we can give generously and live modestly, because we are going to inherit it all. And when things are not well, or like you can receive a meal, bow your head and say, Lord, I don't know what you're doing in my life. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why I'm waiting. I don't know this, that, or the other, but I know this. Today, you've given me a meal. And that's a reminder that you faithfully care for me. If there's a good reason to bow your head over a meal, it's a reminder that Jesus is faithfully caring for you, and of that you can be certain. And by the way, what is Jesus serves breakfast? Here's the resurrected Lord. He's just conquered Satan, sin, and death. He is Lord of all. He's got a seat at the right hand of the Father. The angels are at his beck and call. And what does he do? He serves breakfast. Jesus came into your life, not just to call you to follow him. Because he's the greatest among us, he's happy to serve you. As we sort of wrap this up and kind of want to contemplate how does this apply to your life in particular, and then how does this apply to us as the church in general, especially as we think about the need for more churches to be planted. Good question. Well, I can be assured of this. I can trust Jesus while we're waiting. We can be certain of who he is in our weakness. And we can be assured that he is faithfully caring for his children. In your waiting and in your weakness, be certain of this as an individual. He cares about you. He cares about you where you are in your stage of life. He cares about you if you're young and looking forward to life and a career and a life partner and a family and all. He cares about all that. He cares about you. If you're older, he cares about you, and he wants you to hold the stair rails as you go down the stairs. But he cares about. He will walk with us through the valley of the shadow of death, not just the death of our loved ones, but our own death. He cares. And one of the reasons we gather on Sundays, not Saturdays as the old covenant people, is because we gather on Resurrection Day. On the first day of the week when Christ was rose, we gather, remember, we follow a Christ who's conquered not just sin, but our death. And so as we live out this life, what are we to do? Well, if you don't know what to do, just go to work. Take care of the family. Love your neighbor. Just do those common things. And let Jesus worry about what he's doing behind the scenes. Sometimes you'll see the big catch of fish. Other times he'll just save that for another day and let you know what happened through your faithful plotting at work and school and life and marriage and parenting. Just be faithful. Confess your weakness openly to Jesus. It's okay. To others, it's okay to say, I am weak, as you look to him who is strong. And then, as this applies to church planting, think about this. These guys in this boat were the first church planting team. Now, the church would blow up. They would go back to Jerusalem. And after the day of Pentecost, they were within a month, there was 10,000 people in the church. There was mass conversion. 3,001 sermon. The church would grow. And they would all start heading out in different ways. Some would stay in Jerusalem to see the church and its message, the gospel taught and guarded and proclaimed. Antioch, and then we'd know Doubting Thomas here would become the one to go to southern India with the gospel. But here's how I think you should look at this is be burdened that there aren't enough open doors for the gospel for people to hear. I mentioned 60 towns in New Hampshire, but there are lots of dark spaces and communities in Pennsylvania that don't have gospel light. There aren't gospel communities that share the love of Jesus and that he has finished the work. There aren't safe places for people to come and wrestle with their identity and their confusion that has just amassed in our culture. And maybe you should be burdened about your hometown. Maybe you should take your profession there with a team of people, and because remote work is now more common, maybe you should be part of a team that goes to a remote place or back to your hometown. Maybe you should join a church planting team. Maybe God has given you the leadership capacity. I think you should work that all out with the elders and pastors here. But this I'm certain. Jesus wants you to be part of his church, be part of his gospel, be part of the raising up of leaders, and be part of sending people out. And part of the joy of my life is my dad was a rural pastor. I like small towns. And I love so I've been part-time with Acts 29 since 2018, promoting rural planting. And I have been flown into McGrath, Alaska. There are 200 and some odd fly-in-only communities in Alaska. There's a church planted in McGrath, Alaska. The town is 300 people. The only way to get there is by plane, snowmobile, or boat. And this faithful church making disciples in this community. 2 years ago, I was in Budrio, Italy, little village. And Stefano Mariotti is the pastor, planted a church probably about 10 years ago. And I got to preach there, about 25 people there. Meet 4 of the adults there have come to Christ through that church. One of them, Matteo, 41 years old, single. He's the town butcher. He plays drums on their little worship band. And he says to me in his broken English, "This may not be a big church, but it's a beautiful church." Why is that? Because the gospel has changed his life, and now he's part of the family that will last forever. I can be certain of this. I don't know what's coming in life. I don't know what's coming in this world. I don't know what's coming in my own life, but I do know this. Jesus is our certainty. While you and I are waiting for what's next, for him to come back, for whatever the next instructions are, we can trust him. And though we may feel weak, that's great. That's your qualification to be part of the team. And he cares for you. He cares enough to serve you. You've got to hear this. You've got to go home with this. That your name, you're not like one of the masses. You have his attention. And he loves you. Let that form how you think about your life, and let it form how you see yourself a part of his community and what he wants to do. I don't know what he's up to. I do know this. He's up to stuff. I'm in my fourth decade of being in ministry. First decade, I had to overcome traditionalism. Second decade, I had to overcome pragmatism. Third decade, I had to overcome egotism. In my fourth decade, I'm trying to overcome optimism. What I mean by that is I just see what God is doing around the globe. You need to be encouraged that though we don't know what's happening, Jesus is our servant.